Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Today is kind of a bittersweet day for me. So for any of you that have been following along for a while, you know how much that I use this table saw. And I've had this table saw for roughly 5 or 6 years. And originally it was a Cobalt job site table saw with a fold-up stand, and the stand long since has been taken off and used for something else. I don't even remember what, but for something else. But if you watched my last video, you saw how excited I was because I have finally saved up enough money and purchased a different table saw. But I might just keep this guy. So this Cobalt table saw has an aluminum top, an aftermarket built by Yours Truly fence, because the fence that came with it wouldn't work with the way that I designed my table and my attachment. And it sits on a little stand that I built, and it has worked great. But there are some adjustment screws underneath this top in order to keep that blade aligned with these miter slots. And this one over here has stripped out. So I only have one screw that is holding that blade perpendicular to these miter slots and therefore perpendicular to my fence. So it's time for an upgrade. And I did upgrade. And I found this on Facebook Marketplace. It was a fellow woodworker named Brad was upgrading to a different saw, and he was ready to get rid of this one. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's in great shape. It's a Delta 36725. But I've never had a table saw that had blade height adjustments and the miter or the angle of the blade adjustments on this side. So really excited. It does come with a factory fence, which has just a toggle lockdown, which really excites me because my homemade one has a rounded, lots of spider webs in there, a rounded nut, T-nut type thing that holds it, and it works fine. But to have a actual tape measure marking adjustment is going to be huge for me and a time saver. However, when I picked this up, it was a nice day. This was nice and silver, taken care of, and it hasn't rained in a month. I put it in the back of the truck, and then had to go to a dentist appointment for a cleaning, and it rained that day. And so I came home with a tabletop covered with rust. So I'm going to start by cleaning off all this rust. I'm going to show you guys how I align the blade to the miter slots, the fence to the miter slots, and have everything squared up. I'm going to take this one off, figure out a way to put my new one right here so that I can still have the outfeed table onto my workbench here, and hopefully make some wonderful things with this new one. So stand by. I started by removing the insert plate so that I wouldn't accidentally take the paint off of it. Then added a liberal coat of this lubricant / rust preventer that my friend gave me. Sometimes great ideas are not good ideas at all, and using the random orbital sander and steel wool sounded great, but it didn't work that well. The steel wool just kept flying apart. The rust preventer didn't seem to be working that well either, but fortunately I found this tiny bottle of God's second greatest gift to man, WD-40, in Mandy's stuff, so I borrowed it, and it worked great. And adding a little elbow grease and some double aught steel wool, I was able to get most of the rust off of the top. After a quick cleanup with a cotton rag, I used the orbital sander and some very high grit sandpaper. I think this was 320 grit, and keeping very light pressure, I was able to get the remainder of the rust to come off of the top. can't quite see my reflection in it. That's probably a good thing because it would just scare me every time that I used it. Acetone and a paper towel cleaned up the residual oil so that I could move on to the next step, which was adding a couple of coats of paste wax to make it slippery and smooth. I had a nice moment saying goodbye and thanking him for his service. It was time to go. So I got my new table saw cleaned up. It's pushed up and leveled to my table, and my table is about 3 inches short of the face of the table saw. No big deal because I'm 6'5". Yeah, right. Yeah, so I've got to bring my table up so that when I outfeed big material like plywood, it doesn't just have a dramatic drop and clear the cutting edge of the blade. I want it to smoothly transition out to my outfeed table. So I'm going to bring my table up by adding some blocks to the edge, to the corners and in the middle. Add some 3-inch blocks to that. Bring it up, and then I'll align the blade to the miter slots and to the fence. This is where all those years of CrossFit come in handy. Okay, so I put some spacers under my table to bring it up. It's slightly lower than the face of my table saw, so when I outfeed big things like plywood, they'll just have a small drop down onto the table out there. Not perfectly level, but I did pour this entire slab by myself with Sackcrete back when the COVID lockdown happened. So it might not be perfectly level, but I did a good job. Anyway, just joking. Anyways, so the next thing up is to make sure that the blade is perfectly perpendicular to the miter slots, because all the sleds that I use work off of these miter slots. And then to make sure that the fence, when I lock it down, and it does move quite well, much better than the old one. Make sure that the fence, when you lock it down, is perpendicular to the blade as well. So I'll move on to that, show you guys how I do that. So I built this simple jig that's just a 3/4 inch piece of hardwood that fits in the miter slot, a piece that's nailed on there with 90 degrees, and holes drilled to hold my dial indicator. And when I slide this along the blade, I'm going to set this to 0. And as I slide it along the blade, I want it to remain right at 0. So 4/1000ths of an inch out on the tail end, positive. So it's going 4/1000th of an inch this way at the tail end. Yeah, so that's really not bad, but I want to try to adjust it to get a little bit closer to 0 all the way through. Due to the very tight quarters under this table saw, I was unable to get footage of adjusting the table saw blade. However, I really couldn't get it any closer after all my effort than what it already was. But the adjustment screws on the fence were great, and I got it pretty close to perfect. Okay, so I got my tabletop cleaned and waxed. I got it set up for my Alfie bench, or my workbench. I got the saw blade within 5/1000ths of an inch tolerance from the miter slots. I got the fence set dead on, so that makes me happy, not having to measure. Still got to measure the distance, so if I want 3-inch cut, I want 3 inches from the inside of the blade to the fence, and I want to make 3 inches on this ruler right here. So I've got to test that, make sure that that's right. If not, I can adjust it on the little indicator right here. And then from there, we can start cutting wood. All right, guys, so this is Creators of the Lost Art, or Ron's shop, new table saw. And all in all, I'm happy with it. It does cut square, even though the blade's out just a little bit. It does cut square, not noticeable. It does give me a larger capacity for making bigger fences and a lot longer throat between the start and the throat plate, or the beginning of the saw blade, to make little intricate pieces. It is easier to adjust for miters and things like that. So all in all, for the price that I paid, I'm very happy. And I can't wait to build a lot of things that you guys get to see on this table saw. So thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. It's hard to say goodbye to an old friend, but my plan for this saw is to give it away free of charge with all of the accessories that are built for it to someone that's just getting started out, and maybe that it will encourage them to pick up the hobby that I love so much.